Welcome to Lighting Your Way, a podcast featuring exciting, hilarious, heartbreaking, terrifying, and joyful stories of real nurse advocates helping real patients get the best health care. Hi, I'm Nurse Betty Long. Each week, I and one of my nurse colleagues at Guardian Nurses will take you behind the curtain to help you better navigate the healthcare system when you or a loved one is sick or injured. Peg Pierce, nurse advocate extraordinaire. Welcome to the Lighting Your Way podcast. Thanks for joining me. You are our first guest. How does it feel to be a trailblazer?
It feels awesome to be a trailblazer and a part of Guardian Nurses. I love it.
Great. Well, thank you again. What I want our listeners to know is that at Guardian Nurses, we encourage nurses to tell their stories, right? To toot their horn, as we like to say. Nurses are doing amazing work, both at Guardian Nurses and all over the world. And while the COVID pandemic may have brought highlights of that work to cable news, social media posts, and newspaper front pages, they've been doing it day after day since the days of Florence Nightingale in the late 1800s. I, for one, am thrilled that nurses are finally being given a spotlight. And that's a little part of why we're here, right? Not just for you to toot your horn, but also to empower our listeners to become more educated consumers, better advocates for themselves when they're needing health care.
Betty, I couldn't agree with you any more than I do.
Well, good to know. Good to know. All right, thanks. So before we get started, Peg, how long have you been a nurse?
Let me do the math here. I guess close to 85 years. No, I'm only kidding. This May, I will be a nurse for 34 years, and I have loved every moment and every minute of it.
Congratulations. That's wonderful. And how long have you been at Guardian Nurses?
I have been with Guardian Nurses since 2015, and I love it. Hands down, it's the best job I've ever had. When I tell people about what I do, they get a little jealous, especially other nurses, because I tell them it's like winning the lottery. It really is the best job.
Well, thank you. And we are fortunate to have you on our team, Peg. Okay, so are you ready to tell your story?
Absolutely. I wanted to share a story with you about a gentleman that I met by just making a simple phone call. You know, we meet our patients in different ways, and I get a report every day on who gets approved for what with the union that I take care of. And I just like to reach out, make sure they're in good hands, just basically see if there's anything I can do to make their experience better. And I got a hold of this gentleman. He was very nice, and we had a long conversation. And he went on to tell me that he was diagnosed with kidney cancer, and he was set up to have his surgery in about a week and a half from when we were talking, and that he had a history of this same cancer on the other kidney 5 years prior to this, and he was good to go. He had a surgery all set up. He was getting his CAT scan done beforehand, and thanks for calling, but I'm good. And then I said, okay, well, let's talk a little bit more about that. You know, who's doing the surgery? Where are you having it done? You know, are you fully prepared for things? And he says, well, you know, I'll tell you, and he told me those details. And then he went on to tell me that he had a history of the same cancer 5 years ago in the other kidney. His primary care physician sent him to the surgeon saying, go to this guy. He's the best. He'll take great care of you. He went and he told me that he felt a little like he was taking up the doctor's time. Like he felt like he was kind of like a nuisance to him, and, the doctor told him, here's what we're going to do. Here's the fix. Removing part of the kidney is the cure. There's no need for chemo or radiation, which is the case for this sort of cancer. But he just, left there with just the minimal amount of information. He knew that this surgery would most likely be laparoscopic, but there was a tiny chance he would have to open him up if there was any kind of complication. Maybe 1-2 nights tops in the hospital, and then you're home, and then you're on your way to healing and getting back to work sooner than later. A slam dunker, pretty much is how he said it. And all ready to go. He left with his surgery date in hand. And then he said, and then Peg, in his words, he goes, I woke up and I had tubes coming into me and tubes going out of me. I didn't know what hit me. And he came to find that there were complications in the surgery, and they had to do a big incision and open him up and get that part of the kidney out. And it wasn't, he knew there was a chance, but he didn't know what to expect if they would have to open him up. So he was completely, back by all of this. So the surgeon did come in and see him in the hospital, and pretty much the way the patient described the interaction to me was, pretty much, hey, sorry, this happens. Didn't soften the blow, but this is what happened, and this is what I had to do, and I'll see you in a week and a half in the office for follow-up appointment. So he ended up having just a couple of more complications than expected. He ended up staying in the hospital for a little over a week. Got
Wow.
home. His recovery was not as easy, not a slam dunk at all, and just kind of limped along and got through his recovery. And then at his follow-up appointment, again, no softening of the blow, just that this is how it goes and this is what happened. And then the patient was just on his way, just recovering more. And over the next couple of months, he noticed that where this incision site was, that it had grown, that it was just this big, huge, he didn't know it was a hernia at the time, but he described it as this big, huge outpouching. And it just gotten worse and worse and worse. And then
At the incision
at
site?
the incision site, right? And he went back to the surgeon and said, hey, look at this, what's this? And he says, oh, it looks like you have a faux hernia, which is when, the way he described it was things just didn't, when they were healing, they didn't heal properly. And then all this tissue kind of came out, and that's why you have this faux hernia. And he said, okay, well, doctor, can you fix it? He says, oh, no, listen, that fix is going to be more bother than it's worth. You're going to have to spend more days in the hospital with drains, and it's just better to just learn to live with it.
Wow.
So, right. So cut to 5 years later, I'm meeting this gentleman on the phone, and he tells me about all of this. And I said, hey, listen, um, you know how your experience went 5 years ago, right? He says, yeah. I said, well, what if I tell you there's a really good chance that I could get you into really great, skilled hands, and have a better outcome and a better experience? Is that something that you would be interested in, when you're having a big surgery like this? And at first he kind of thought, no, I think I'll just stick with this guy. He's right down the road, and then the more we talked about it, and I kind of, called back to some of the things that he shared with me about his experience in the office and with the doctor at bedside. And I said, how did it make you feel? Tell me how that made you feel, when you're in the bed and you
Good
find out that
question.
this happens, right?
Good question.
And yeah, and let's talk about that. And the more I asked him to share his feelings, the more he shared, right? Because nobody else gave me the opportunity to do it. And then he went on to say, well, I felt like I was kind of just in the way. And
Oh, geez.
I didn't have the right to say anything, and that this was just unfortunate, and it happened, and I had to deal with it, and to pretty much suck it up. And I said, and then I said, well, listen, I know your surgery is set for like a week and a half from now, but give me a chance to work some magic and get you in, right, with another set of eyes and skilled hands, and just see how you feel about it, right? Just see how you feel about it. I said, because one thing I like to tell people is that you're gonna pay the same copay that you will for an okay doctor, that you will pay for a really skilled and awesome doctor with a great bedside,
That's a
right?
great way to sell them on it.
Yeah. And, so he said, okay, I'll give you the shot. So I ended up getting him in with a really great doctor um, in 2 days. And I was on the appointment with him, and he was so impressed by the care, the time that the doctor took to tell him. And he gave him statistics and numbers and said, yeah, there's a chance I might have to open you up and can't do this laparoscopically, but that's like a less than 0.1%. And I've
Wow.
done thousands of these surgeries, and we can absolutely get this done laparoscopically.
And
And
Peg,
why?
Peg, were
Sorry.
you there at the appointment?
Well, because of COVID, unfortunately, ideally I'd like to be there in person, but I was there telephonically.
Okay, great.
Yeah. But and it's still a meaningful appointment. I thought it went really, really well. And I asked all the questions that I would normally ask in person, and it went really well. So after the appointment, let me back up a little bit. The doctor said, this is the numbers, this is the 0.1% chance I might have to do an incision, but I really think that this is going to go well. I've done thousands of these. And the patient said, okay, and as they're ready to wrap things up, and he said, oh, by the way, I know just the colleague to send you to get that faux hernia fixed, because that can't be pleasant walking around with that, getting caught on things and being uncomfortable and just putting your pants on in the morning.
Yeah, because
So
this patient was a building trades guy, right?
exactly,
Right.
lots of, everything, moving in
Bumping and
small
right.
spaces, bending,
Yeah.
crawling, and all of that business. So that was a game changer. That would be a game changer for him to get that fixed. So after every appointment I have with somebody, we talked about how he felt about it, because that's a big deal. That's important for us. Forging a relationship with people is not
Right.
just doing the details, getting the appointment. You know, it's how did you feel about that? What's going on in your head? And he said, "Oh my gosh, I'm just floored by the experience, like just how he sat and talked and showed me the imaging and what the plan is." And he said, "Peg, would you mind canceling my appointment with the other surgeon?" I said, "I will gladly cancel that for you. No problem." And he had his surgery and it went great. He spent one night in the hospital.
Wow.
And I just talked to him recently. He's doing great. He still has to follow up with the other surgeon for the hernia. He just wanted his dust to settle a little bit, but he's doing great and he's very happy.
Wow, that is wonderful story. That's great. So he's doing okay now? And when's
Yeah,
he and he's going to follow up about the hernia.
yes, he is. And I'm going to help him with that. When he said the time's right, I'm going to make the call, just like we did with the other surgeon. Just get him all set up, go with him, make
Yeah.
sure he's good along the way.
Yeah, he's going to be your first call. Or you're
Yeah,
going to be his first
I'm
call,
going
I
to be
should
his
say.
first call.
Yeah,
I would
you're
hope
going to
so.
be.
Yeah, yeah.
So patients are, I think patients often are under the impression that second opinions, which is what you did for your patient, must be approved by their insurance company. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can. I can't tell you how many times, I brought up a second opinion to people that I'm working with, and they say, "I don't know, is insurance going to pay for that?" And I said, "Yes, the insurance is definitely going to pay for that." I sometimes have people get a third opinion. That's not uncommon, until you're really sure with your game plan and your provider. You should get just about as many opinions that you feel like you need to get, so that you're making the right decision for yourself or your family member.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, right? Because, and even to your point, third opinions, if one says one thing, the other says another, and you're
Hmm.
thinking, okay, I can split the difference and get the third physician to chime in. So sometimes that can,
Absolutely.
particularly when I think you're talking about treatment options, when they're
Hmm.
so disparate, if one says this and one says that, you're thinking, wait a minute, how can they be so different?
Right.
Um, I'm curious about the question that you asked your patient about his first surgeon after the
Hmm.
appointment. You said you sat down and said, "How did he make you feel?" Why was that important to ask him? What were you hoping to elicit from him?
Well, in our conversation, I could kind of figure out how that must have felt. Kind of feeling brushed off and just given the minimal amount of information, and you're just this cog plugged into this machine, and
Right.
then you're spat out somewhere in the process with a good or an okay result. Um, and I just wanted him to tell me how that made him feel, so that he knew that he is worthy of a second opinion, that he's worthy of getting the proper care and having the best experience possible.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I think that matters most to folks that we work with is that we can improve their experience because we know how to kind of navigate the system for them, right? So
Hmm.
we know who to call. In your case, in this case, you were able to get this gentleman an appointment in 2 days, right?
Right.
Which he may not have been able to do. So that's part of, I guess, the services that you provide to the patients. But another question I wanted to ask over the
Hmm.
years, I've heard a lot of patients say, look, I don't care if my surgeon has a good personality. He doesn't need to be my best friend, right? I just want him to
Hmm.
be the best at what I need him for, which is surgery. What do you say to patients like that?
Well, it really goes back to, how do you feel about this? There are some people that, and I've come across many, where they know that the person doesn't have a great bedside, or they are in and out, but they know their work, either it was, a prior experience with themselves or a family member, and they're okay with that. Some people are just fine. I don't really need somebody to be touchy feely and give me a hug afterwards. I just need them to fix my fill in the blank.
Right.
But there are a lot of folks who really have a desire to have the whole kit and caboodle. They want the total package. They want to get, of course, the best care. They want the best
Right.
outcome.
Right. Sure.
Right. But they also want to, feel that they're part of the process, that they're a human being sitting there in the chair, and this, they're seen that way by the doctor, and they're very much a part of the whole process. So, when I get that feeling, that maybe they don't feel that way, then that's exactly the time that I bring up, the idea of a second opinion.
Yeah, and second opinions. So you have knowledge of, right. So when you're in with the accompaniment, when you can,
Mm-hmm.
pre-COVID and post-COVID, when you go into an accompaniment, when you're with that patient, and what questions are you making sure are answered? So maybe the patient's all set up, they have their questions written down, but then you're there as a second set of ears.
Mm-hmm.
What questions for patients would be important? What do we want to encourage our patients and listeners to listen to ask?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think really important questions to ask are exactly, clarify, what do we have going on? If we don't know our diagnosis and we're just finding that out, what exactly are we dealing with?
Okay.
And then what is the treatment plan? What is, any complication that could happen from the treatment plan? All the specifics that go along with something like that. What are my expectations? When should I start feeling better? When, whatever the issue is, whatever that appropriate expectation question would be to ask, what should I be expecting? This patient, when he woke up and he had tubes coming in and going out of everywhere, he didn't expect that. If
Okay.
I was on that appointment, I would have asked, hey, if you do have to do a big incision, what does that look like? What does that recovery look like?
Right.
And he would say, well, you'd have some drains, we'd have to do IV antibiotics, that sort of thing. So when the person would wake up, they go, oh yeah. What, Peg asked this question. I do remember this.
That's good. Yeah. And because I think expectations, we don't communicate, right? That's one of the
Mm-hmm.
biggest problems in
Mm-hmm.
healthcare, is that there's very little communication. And really the profile for surgeons is that they just want to do surgery. They don't necessarily want to communicate with folks.
Yeah.
And in that instance, 5-6 years ago, right? And this,
Mm-hmm.
this surgeon is still practicing. So who knows, right? We've had stories like that throughout our lives at Guardian Nurses, where surgeons are doing what this gentleman did.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So what, when you think about it, right? I know there's probably a bunch of answers for this, but if you had to give one piece of advice to our listeners, might be heading to an appointment with a surgeon, what would that be?
One piece of advice, I would boil it down to, you are in more of control of the game plan than you think. My tagline that I use with people is, hey, listen, you're driving this train. You can drive it to wherever you want it to go. I'm there to help you get it to the proper destination.
Right.
But you do have the right to ask all the questions that you want to ask before going into any kind of surgery, and you absolutely have the right to get a second opinion.
Right. Particularly if you're asking those questions in that first
Mm-hmm.
appointment and you're feeling dismissed. Right.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
That's not a good feeling.
No.
Particularly if you're
No.
putting yourself in the hands of someone who's doing surgery.
Yeah, I mean, imagine how vulnerable you would feel, that you're putting your life in the hands of this person, and you just kind of have this feeling like, oh boy, that took about 5 minutes. I came, I was ready for this appointment for weeks, and just the anxiety of getting here and sitting in this chair and waiting for this doctor to sit down and have a conversation with me, and he's gone in less than 5 minutes, and, I'm having this surgery, but not, still feeling like your feet really aren't on the ground, ready for the whole thing.
Right. And I think, I often say to patients, if your instinct or if your gut is telling you something, you have to listen to it. Right.
Oh,
And in this
absolutely.
case,
Yeah.
okay. So let me throw this question at you.
Uh-huh.
I'm asking everyone. So when this pandemic is over, and it will be soon, hopefully, I will fill in the blank.
Oh, I will. I've already been planning this. I will be having all of my family and friends over for a huge party, and it's going to have everything. I'm going to have a Christmas tree, Easter eggs, St. Patrick's Day music playing. It's going to be 4th of July, everything all rolled into one, and just, having fun and being with each other.
Oh,
I cannot wait.
that
Yeah.
sounds like a blast. That's great.
Yeah.
And a great way to celebrate a
Sure.
long, long, long year. So,
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Peg, thanks for joining us today. Really enjoyed talking with you, and keep up the good work.
Oh, thanks for having me, Betty. I really appreciate it.
All right, take care.
You too.
Thank you for joining us this week. You can find the Lighting Your Way podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google, YouTube, Spotify, and Stitcher. If you liked what you heard, tell a friend and leave us a review. You can learn all about Guardian Nurses Healthcare Advocates on our website, guardiannurses.com. So until next time, find some joy in your life, pet all the good doggies and kitties, and remember to tell your people that you love them. Take care.